The city did not weep that evening, it bled a cold, metallic drizzle that glossed the pavement into a shivering river of reflected neon and shadow. It was the kind of rain that felt less like weather and more like an atmosphere, a greasy miasma that seeped through cloth and clung to skin, carrying with it the sour notes of exhaust and decayed dreams. For Maya, each drop was a frantic drumbeat against the rhythm of her own panicked heart, a syncopated percussion to her flight. Her breath tore from her lungs in ragged, visible plumes, stolen by the chill and the sheer, unadulterated fear that had become her most constant companion. The alley she ducked into offered no solace, its confines mere yards of grimy brick and overflowing dumpsters that reeked of rotten produce and despair. She pressed herself against the cold wall, the rough stone snagging the cheap fabric of her jacket, and dared a glance back the way she'd come. There they were, twin spears of halogen light cutting through the gauzy curtain of rain, moving with a slow, predatory sweep. Detective David Crowley's unmarked sedan. He wasn't using his siren. This wasn't an official pursuit. This was a hunt, and she was the prey he had promised. In a voice of terrifying calm, he would never let go. The memory of his hands, deceptively gentle before they turned brutal, flashed behind her eyes. The possessive gleam in his gaze that mistook obsession for love. His badge, which had once seemed like a promise of safety, was now the instrument of her terror, shielding him as he crossed every line. He had found her again, as she knew he would. The borrowed room with its flimsy door lock, the waitressing job under a false name, it had all been a fleeting illusion of freedom, now shattered. The headlights slowed at the mouth of the alley. A sob, sharp and involuntary, caught in her throat. To be caught here, in this filthy cul-de-sac, was to vanish. No one would question a detective taking a woman in for questioning. No one would hear her final screams over the city's indifferent hum. Pushing off the wall, she stumbled back into the main thoroughfare, her sneakers slipping on the wet sidewalk. The glowing sign appeared not as a haven, but as a sudden, stark rectangle of amber light in the gloom, the Onyx Room. It was an establishment that spoke of quiet money and discreet tastes, its door a slab of darkened oak, its name etched in minimalist chrome. It was not for the likes of her, with her drenched clothes and wild eyes. But it was open, and it was a door, and the alternative was the gleam of those headlights turning the corner. She burst inside, the weight of the door heavier than it looked. The world changed. The din of the rain vanished, swallowed by a cavernous silence broken only by the soft clink of glass and the low thrum of a jazz bass line from hidden speakers. The air was warm, scented with lemon polish, fine whiskey, and a hint of cigar smoke that had long since settled into the velvet drapes. It was a temple of curated shadows and soft, golden pools of light that glinted off crystal decanters and the polished mahogany of a bar that stretched like a dark river. A woman stood behind it, elegant and sharp-featured, wiping a glass with a cloth so white it seemed to glow. Anya. Her eyes, the color of flint, lifted and took in Maya's entrance with the swift, comprehensive assessment of one used to managing chaos with icy calm. Before she could speak, Maya was at the bar, her palms slapping the cool wood, her voice a cracked whisper. "Please. The back door. Is there a back door? He's right behind me." Anya's gaze flickered past her to the rain-streaked window, her expression unreadable. She began to speak, a practiced, dismissive sentence forming on her lips, but it died there. The atmosphere in the room shifted, a subtle but profound drop in pressure, as if the very shadows had drawn a breath. "Is there a problem, Anya?" The voice came from the depths of the room, from a high-backed booth shrouded in deeper darkness near the back wall. It was not loud, yet it carried, smooth and controlled, a blade wrapped in silk. From the booth, a man unfolded himself. He moved with an unhurried, predatory grace that seemed to command the light around him. Luca Vitali was younger than his presence suggested, his features a study in stark, clean lines, a sharp jaw, a severe mouth, eyes that were not just dark but seemed to absorb the light from the room. He wore his expensive suit not as a costume, but as a second skin, an extension of his own formidable will. He did not approach the bar so much as he descended upon it, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. His eyes, those twin pools of obsidian, fixed on Maya. They did not scan her with pity or curiosity, they processed her. They saw the genuine terror, the raw, unscripted desperation, the specific quality of fear that spoke of a personal, intimate predator. He recognized it, the way a hound recognizes the scent of its quarry. The door opened again, letting in a gust of wet, hostile air. David stood there, his detective's shield already in hand, held up like a talisman. His eyes, burning with a fervent, possessive rage, scanned the room and locked onto Maya with a triumphant glare. He didn't see Luca, not yet. "There you are," he said, his voice dripping with a false, cloying relief. "You've had us all worried, sweetheart. Time to come home." Maya froze, a rabbit in the final, blinding glare of the headlamp. She felt the solid wood of the bar against her legs, a literal end of the line. Luca took one fluid step, placing himself not quite between Maya and David, but on a direct line to him, altering the geometry of the confrontation. He didn't look at Maya. His entire focus was on the man in the doorway. "Can I help you, officer?" The question was polite, utterly devoid of warmth. David's attention snapped to him, his confidence faltering for a fraction of a second as he took in Luca's impossible-to-ignore aura of authority. "Detective Crowley. This is a police matter. That woman is wanted for questioning." "Is she?" Luca replied, his tone one of mild, academic interest. He finally glanced at Maya, a slow, deliberate turn of his head. His gaze held hers for a heartbeat, a look that was not reassurance, but a command for silence. Then he looked back at David. "She's a patron of my establishment. She's been here for the better part of an hour, enjoying a drink in peace." "I'm afraid you're mistaken." The lie was delivered with such flawless, unshakable conviction that even Maya felt a bizarre urge to believe it. David's face flushed. He took a step forward, his badge gleaming. "I'm going to need you to step aside, sir. This doesn't concern you." A faint, cold smile touched Luca's lips, not reaching his eyes. "Everything in this room concerns me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The absolute certainty in it vibrated in the hushed air. "You have no warrant. You are outside your precinct, if I'm not mistaken. You are disturbing the peace of my business." He paused, letting the unspoken threats, of connections, of consequences David could not fathom, hang in the space between them. "The lady is staying. You are leaving." David wavered. The cop in him saw a civilian obstructing an investigation. The predator in him, however, saw something else entirely in Luca's unwavering stillness, a deeper, older, and far more dangerous kind of predator. The badge in his hand felt suddenly flimsy, a tin shield against a force of nature. The calculation in his eyes was visible, rage warring with a dawning, instinctual self-preservation. With a final, venomous look at Maya, a look that promised this was not over, he slowly lowered his shield. He took a step back, then another, retreating into the rain-slashed night. The door hissed shut behind him, sealing the silence back into place. Maya's legs gave out. She gripped the edge of the bar, her knuckles white, the adrenaline draining from her body and leaving a profound, trembling void. The jazz bassline thrummed on, a surreal soundtrack to her salvation. Luca turned those dark eyes back to her. The clinical assessment was gone, replaced by something more intent, more proprietary. He had not acted out of kindness. He had seen a piece of valuable, distressed property being wrongly pursued, and he had asserted his domain. In the quiet of the onyx room, with the scent of fear and fine whiskey mingling in the air, a transaction had been proposed without a single word of negotiation being spoken. Sanctuary had been granted, and its price, yet unknown, now hung around Maya's neck, invisible and infinitely heavy. The cage, she would soon understand, had simply changed shape, and its new owner was standing before her, already considering where to place her. The silence after the door clicked shut was more profound than any noise. It was a vacuum, thick and expectant, broken only by the faint, mournful sigh of a saxophone from the hidden speakers and the frantic, rabbit-quick rhythm of Maya's own heart against her ribs. The plush carpet beneath her feet seemed to soften and muffle the world, making the bar feel like a stage set floating in a dark sea. Luca Vitali did not move to console her, nor did he dismiss her. He simply stood, a pillar of immaculate black wool and silent authority, his gaze a physical weight upon her. He was waiting, for the trembling to subside, for the shock to crystallize into comprehension, for her to understand the fundamental shift that had just occurred in her universe. Anya, behind the bar, had resumed polishing the same glass, her movements economical and precise, her eyes lowered. She was a portrait of studied neutrality, a witness who had already filed the event away in a mental ledger. It was clear that no call to the real police would be made, no report filed. This room operated under a different jurisdiction. "Follow me," Luca said. The command was not harsh, but it brooked no possibility of disobedience. It was the tone one might use to direct a lost guest to the correct hallway, yet it carried the gravity of a sentencing. He turned and walked toward the rear of the bar, not checking to see if she obeyed. The assumption of compliance was absolute. Maya's legs, numb and uncooperative, somehow carried her forward. She passed the empty booths, their dark leather swallowing the light, and a single, older patron in the corner who pointedly studied the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, having perfected the art of seeing nothing. A heavy, unmarked door beside the restrooms was held open by Luca, revealing a narrow staircase lit by small, recessed sconces that cast long, dramatic shadows up the walls. The air grew cooler, smelling of old stone and polished wood. At the top, another door opened into his office. It was not what she expected. There was no garish opulence, no cliché of crime. It was a room of severe, almost monastic elegance. One wall was floor-to-ceiling books, volumes in leather and crisp cloth, their titles in languages she didn't recognize. A large, minimalist desk of dark, fossilized wood stood bare except for a single closed laptop and a sleek, black telephone. The windows here were tall and narrow, fitted with bulletproof glass so clear it rendered the weeping city outside a shimmering, impressionist painting. The only concessions to comfort were two low, modern armchairs positioned before a cold fireplace. He gestured to one, and she sank into it, the buttery leather sighing beneath her. She felt childlike, her damp clothes absurd against such refined surroundings. Luca did not sit behind the desk, the power seat. Instead, he took the chair opposite her, leaning back and steepling his fingers. He studied her again, but this was a different sort of examination. The initial triage was over, now he was conducting an appraisal. "Your name," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Maya," she whispered, her voice still raw from running, from panting, from fear. "David Crowley. A detective with the 16th Precinct. Your former partner." He prompted the word with a slight tilt of his head, his eyes missing nothing, the flinch at David's name, the way her hands clutched at the arms of the chair. "Yes," she managed. There was no point in lying. He knew. "He believes you belong to him." Luca's voice was analytical, detached. A common, if tedious, pathology. The badge grants him a certain latitude to pursue this belief. It makes him a persistent problem. He paused, letting the word problem hang in the air, a small, solvable thing. But only a problem. He shifted, ever so slightly. You have no family you trust. No resources he cannot trace. The job you had, the room you rented, they were temporary hiding places, not solutions. You are, at this moment, a woman with negative value. You are a liability to anyone who shelters you, and a prize to the man hunting you. Each word was a cold, precise scalpel, laying her reality bare with a brutality that was somehow worse than David's fists because it was so utterly devoid of malice. It was simply fact. "I have positive value," he continued, his dark eyes holding hers. "I have walls he cannot breach. I have eyes he cannot see. I have a reach his badge cannot fathom. Tonight, I have interceded. That intervention has a cost." This was it. The transaction. Maya's mouth was dry. "Money? I don't have." A faint, almost imperceptible flicker of dismissal crossed his features. "Your money is irrelevant. The currency is obedience. You will work here, at the Onyx Room. Anya will find you a role. You will live in a building I own, where the security is mine. You will not leave the city. You will not contact anyone from your past. Your existence, for the foreseeable future, is within a perimeter I define." He laid it out like the terms of a business contract. "In return, David Crowley will cease to be your problem. He will be mine." It was protection, yes. But it was protection that sounded indistinguishable from imprisonment. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. The freedom she had been running toward was being replaced by a different kind of confinement, one offered by a man whose calm demeanor was more terrifying than any of David's rages. Before she could formulate a response, not that a refusal seemed to exist as an option, the office door opened without a knock. A man filled the doorway. Where Luca was controlled precision, this man was volatile potential. Silas was older, with a broad frame that spoke of past brute strength now layered with a hard, dense power. His face was a roadmap of old conflicts, a scar tugging at the corner of his lip into a perpetual near-sneer. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, swept the room and landed on Maya with an instant, visceral contempt. They were the eyes of a man who categorized the world into tools, threats, and weaknesses. "We have a thing in the basement that needs your attention," Silas said to Luca, his voice a gravelly rumble. His gaze never left Maya. "Didn't realize we were running a charity ward now." Luca didn't turn. His focus remained on Maya, as if Silas's entrance was an expected, minor interruption. "Silas. This is Maya. She will be part of the operations here." Silas let out a short, humorless puff of air. "Operations." He repeated the word as if it were a joke. "She's a tail, Luca. A complication. Cops sniffing around, even bad ones, bring heat we don't need." He took a step into the room, his presence making the spacious office feel cramped. "Let me handle the detective. Clean. Simple. And send her back to whatever hole she crawled out of." The offer hung in the air, ugly and final. Handle. Clean. Maya understood the definitions perfectly. A cold deeper than the rain outside seeped into her bones. Luca finally turned his head, just enough to look at Silas. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "The decision is made. She stays under my protection. The detective is my concern, not yours. See to the thing in the basement." It was a dismissal, but more than that, it was a reassertion of hierarchy. Silas's jaw tightened, the scar whitening. His pale eyes bored into Maya one last time, a promise of future trouble, before he gave a curt, insolent nod and turned, leaving the door open behind him. The brief, tense exchange had clarified everything. Luca's world was not one of unified kindness. It was a jungle with its own predators, and she had just been marked as a potential weakness by the alpha wolf second. Her value was contested, and that made her position perilous. Luca turned back to her, the silent aftermath of the power struggle with Silas still crackling in the air. "Your answer," he said, as if there had been no interruption. Maya looked from his impassive face to the sleek, rain-blurred window, the city a tapestry of distant, free-moving lights. She thought of David's triumphant eyes, of the certain, grim fate Silas had just proposed. There was no choice, only a selection of paths into different darknesses. One darkness, at least, offered a barrier against the other. "Yes," she said, the word a hollow surrender. A nod, minimal. "Anya will see you to your new apartment. You start tomorrow." He stood, a signal the audience was over. As she rose on unsteady legs, he added, his voice low, "Understand this, Maya. The dead is not just for keeping him out." He finally gestured, a slight motion of his hand toward the world beyond his windows, toward David. "It is for letting you in." The truth of it struck her with the force of a physical blow. The most dangerous door had not been the one she'd fled through, but the one she had just willingly entered. The cage door. And it had shut with a whisper, not a slam, locking with the quiet, definitive click of a vault. The apartment was a study in silent, sterile luxury. Anya had led her there, a 5-minute walk through a discreet, covered walkway that connected to a building that looked like any other upscale downtown residence from the outside. Inside, it was a fortress. Anya's keycard, followed by a 6-digit code, followed by a biometric scan of her thumb, were required just to reach the elevator bank. The elevator itself had no buttons for the top 3 floors. Anya used another keycard to send them gliding upward to the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into a small, marble-floored vestibule with only one door. "Another code. Memorize it," Anya said, her voice as neutral as her expression. "Don't write it down. Your biometrics will be registered tomorrow. Until then, don't lose this." She handed Maya a single, unmarked black keycard. "The refrigerator is stocked. The closet has clothes in your size. Do not attempt to leave the building without explicit instruction or accompaniment. The system will not permit it, and the consequences would be problematic." With that, she was gone, the elevator sighing shut behind her, leaving Maya standing alone in the profound quiet of her new prison. It was breathtakingly beautiful. The entire west wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic, postcard view of the city's glittering skyline, the rivers of light that were the streets, the dark serpentine curve of the river beyond. The furnishings were minimalist and devastatingly expensive, a low sofa the color of storm clouds, a single abstract painting that was a violent slash of crimson on a field of gray, a rug so thick and soft it seemed to drink the sound of her footsteps. The kitchen was a symphony of brushed steel and marble, utterly spotless. The bedroom held a vast platform bed dressed in linens of a crisp, high thread count white. The bathroom was all black slate and steamless glass, a waterfall showerhead big enough for 3 people. It was a suite in a 5-star hotel, but one where the doors only locked from the outside. Maya tested the balcony door, locked, sealed shut with a mechanism she couldn't see. The windows didn't open. The air was filtered, temperature-controlled, perfect. She was a specimen in a terrarium, afforded every comfort except the freedom to open the lid. The first night was a vigil. She sat on the cloud-gray sofa, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the city she could no longer touch. Every distant siren, every flash of headlights on the avenue below, made her heart stutter. She waited for the sound of David's voice in the hall, for the shatter of glass, for the inevitable failure of this impossible sanctuary. Sleep, when it came, was thin and fractured, filled with dreams of running through endless, opulent hallways that all looked like Luca's office. Her induction at the Onyx Room the next day was just as clinical. Anya provided a uniform, a simple, elegant black dress that fit her perfectly, as promised, and assigned her duties. They were menial, designed to keep her visible and contained, polishing glassware until it sang, refilling the stainless steel ice wells, restocking the sleek refrigerators with artisanal mixers and delicate citrus garnishes. She was not to interact with patrons beyond a polite, monosyllabic response if directly addressed. She was a ghost in the machinery, an attractive but silent part of the ambience. And Luca watched. He was often there, a shadow in his preferred booth or holding quiet court at the far end of the bar. He never seemed to stare, but she could feel his attention like a low-grade current in the air. He was observing her acclamation, studying her reactions. He saw the way she flinched when a boisterous group entered, how her eyes darted to the door every time it opened, the careful, measured movements she used as if afraid to break the expensive silence. He was peeling back the layers of her fear, not to comfort, but to understand its dimensions, its triggers, its uses. One evening, a week into her confinement, he summoned her to his office after closing. The bar was empty, the chairs upturned on tables by the silent, efficient cleaning crew. The climb up the stairs felt longer in the dark. He was at his desk this time, the laptop open, casting a pale blue glow on his austere features. He did not invite her to sit. "Tell me about the first time he struck you," he said, without preamble. His tone was that of a clinician taking a history. The bluntness was a violation. It stole the air from her lungs. She stood before his desk, feeling exposed under the cool, analytical gaze. I don't. The circumstances," he interrupted, his voice steady. What was the perceived transgression? Was it public or private? Did he use his hand, or an object? Did he apologize afterwards? Each question was a scalpel, precise and icy. She found herself answering in fractured sentences, recounting the awful, mundane origin of the terror, a dinner gone cold, a criticism she'd dared to voice. Luca listened, his fingers steepled, his expression impassive. He was not sympathizing, he was building a profile. Of David, yes, but also of her. He was learning how she broke, where her resilience lay, what kind of pressure she had been subjected to. He sees it as discipline, Luca concluded when she trailed off, her voice thin. A perversion of his duty. It makes him predictable in his unpredictability. A man who mistakes cruelty for control is, ultimately, a weak man. He said it with a dismissive finality that was both terrifying and, perversely, a relief. In Luca's world, David was a petty tyrant, a bug to be dissected, not an omnipotent monster. These sessions became a grim routine. Sometimes he questioned her about her past, her family, the job she'd held. Other times, he issued quiet directives about her behavior in the bar: speak less, keep your eyes lowered when Silas is present, never go to the storage cellar alone. He was programming her for survival within his ecosystem. And through it all, she began to see the faint, ominous outlines of his empire. It was never explicit. It was in the men who visited him, not businessmen with briefcases, but hard-eyed individuals with the stillness of predators, who spoke in low tones and were greeted with a respect that bordered on fear. It was in the packages that were delivered to the back door, long and flat, handled only by Silas. It was in the way the city's noise, its chaos, seemed to part around the onyx room like water around a stone. One night, a city councilman, his face flushed with drink and self-importance, made a loud, lewd comment toward Maya as she refilled his companion's water glass. Before she could even react, Luca had appeared beside the table. He said nothing. He simply placed a hand on the councilman's shoulder, leaned down, and whispered a single sentence in his ear. The man's face drained of all color, his boisterousness collapsing into a stammered, desperate apology. He left shortly after, his party in confused tow. Luca had returned to his booth without a glance in Maya's direction. The protection was absolute and utterly transactional. She was his asset, and no one touched what was his without permission. The strange, twisted attraction began there, in that toxic soil of fear and dependency. It was not born of affection, but of a terrifying, primal recognition. His power was a dark magnet, and her vulnerability was a compass needle swinging inevitably toward it. In a world where David's violence had been chaotic, hot, and personal, Luca's was controlled, cold, and impersonal. There was a horrific safety in that predictability. She found herself watching the way he moved, the precise cadence of his speech, the absolute certainty that radiated from him. He was the unyielding wall between her and the chaos, and though the wall itself was forbidding, it was, for now, on her side. He saw it too, this perverse shift. During one of their office sessions, he noted the change in her posture, the slight decrease in the frantic dilation of her pupils when he entered a room. "You are adapting," he stated, a note of clinical approval in his voice. It was the highest praise he could offer. "The fear is becoming focus." "Good." One night, as she was preparing to leave the bar under the watchful eye of one of Luca's drivers, he stopped her at the foot of the private staircase. He stood close, closer than he ever had. She could smell the clean, faint scent of his soap, see the impossible darkness of his eyes in the dim light. "This city is a machine, Maya," he said, his voice low, for her alone. "It has gears and pistons, most of them rusted and grinding. David was a malfunctioning cog. I have removed it." He reached out, not touching her, but his hand hovered near her cheek, a phantom caress. "But the machine is vast. You are now a new piece, placed within a delicate mechanism. Learn its rhythms. Move only when and where I permit. Your safety is no longer a matter of hiding. It is a matter of synchronizing." He turned and ascended the stairs, leaving her standing in the empty bar, the truth of his words settling into her bones. The running was over. She was not in a hiding place. She was inside the engine of a great, dark machine, and its master was teaching her how not to be crushed by its gears. The cage was gilded, but it was also a crucible, and she was beginning to feel its heat, molding her into a shape she did not yet recognize. The city, viewed from the pristine isolation of her penthouse terrarium, began to transform in Maya's perception. It was no longer a sprawling labyrinth of potential escape routes and anonymous shadows in which to disappear. Through the impervious glass, it resolved into a vast, intricate game board, its streets like ruled lines, its buildings like pieces of varying significance. She was a piece herself, lifted from the chaotic scrum and placed on a single, fixed square by an unseen hand. The problem, as Silas's pale, contemptuous eyes constantly reminded her, was that a stationary piece is also a vulnerable one. David Crowley was not a man who accepted removal from the board. Obsession is a patient, resourceful poison, and his badge was a master key to certain kinds of information. His initial, instinctual fear of Luca had been genuine, but it had curdled into a festering, humiliated rage. He was a predator denied his kill, and the scent of a more powerful rival only deepened his fixation. In the sterile light of the precinct, surrounded by the mundane chatter of petty crime and bureaucratic paperwork, David began a quiet, systematic search. He ran Maya's known aliases through systems with wider nets. He called in favors from traffic cops and patrol officers, asking for sightings of a woman matching her description in the downtown core. He sat in his unmarked car on rain-slicked nights, drinking bad coffee, and watched the comings and goings of places where power and discretion met: clubs, high-end restaurants, members-only bars. The Onyx Room was a whisper in certain circles, a place not found on tourist maps but well known to those who valued privacy above all else. It took time, but a pattern emerged from David's dogged scrutiny, a woman matching Maya's build and coloring, always arriving and departing in the company of severe, well-dressed men, never alone, her face often half turned away. The connection was tentative, a thread. He pulled on it. A search of property records, obscured through layers of holding companies, eventually led back to a name that generated a low, cautionary hum in the law enforcement database, Vitali. It was a footnote, a ghost, no active warrants, no prosecutions, just an advisory flag denoting associated interests and a recommendation for circumspect engagement. The file was thin, but its very emptiness was more telling than a rap sheet a mile long. David leaned back in his creaking office chair, the glow of his monitor painting his face a sickly blue. A corrosive blend of emotions churned within him, a fresh, more potent fear, yes, but beneath it, a thrilling, self-righteous vindication. She hadn't just left him, she had thrown herself into the arms of a monster far worse. His narrative solidified, hardening into a fanatical certainty. He wasn't just a jilted lover anymore, he was a rescuer. He was the only one who could save Maya from the devil she'd chosen. This belief sanctified his rage, turning it into a crusade. Within the insulated world of the Onyx Room, the threat was internal. Silas became the embodiment of the looming consequences Luca had warned her about. He was a constant, simmering presence, a storm cloud parked at the end of the bar. He never addressed her directly with open hostility, but his disdain was a physical force. He would hold out his empty glass, not asking, simply waiting for her to scurry over and refill it, his pale eyes tracking her every hesitant movement. He held loud, pointed conversations with other loyal soldiers about loyalty, about the weakness that sentiment bred, about how a single rusted link could compromise the entire chain. "You don't bring a stray dog into a kennel of wolves," he growled one evening to a hulking man named Victor, his voice carrying clearly to where Maya polished wine glasses. "It doesn't make the dog safe. It just gives the wolves something tender to tear apart when they get bored." Maya's hands trembled, a high-pitched ring singing from the rim of the glass she held too tightly. Luca, from his booth, heard it all. He had been reviewing something on a tablet, but his focus shifted. He didn't look at Silas. He looked at Maya, observing the effect of the words, the subtle crumbling of the composure he was trying to build in her. He saw the fear return, but laced now with a new understanding. The fear was not just of David out there, but of Silas in here. Later that night, in the vault-like quiet after closing, Luca did not summon her to the office. Instead, he intercepted her as she collected her coat from the staff alcove. Silas was still present, counting the night's take from the safe with Victor. "Silas," Luca's voice cut through the room, clean and sharp. "A word." Silas looked up, his expression one of exaggerated patience. He ambled over, the stack of bills in his hand. Luca did not lower his voice. "Your concerns about security are noted," Luca began, his tone devoid of inflection. "Your continued commentary on my decisions is not. Maya is under my protection. That is not a topic for debate, nor is it a signal for psychological warfare. When you speak to undermine that, you are not questioning her. You are questioning me. Do you have a question for me, Silas?" The air turned to glass. Victor became profoundly interested in his shoes. Silas's face went very still, the scar by his lip standing out like a crack in marble. The challenge was absolute, and delivered in front of an underling and the very woman in question. It was a brutal assertion of dominance. Silas's jaw worked. "No question," he finally said, the words ground out like gravel. "Just thinking about the health of the family." "The health of the family is my concern," Luca replied, his gaze never wavering. "Your concern is the task in front of you. See that it's done correctly." He turned then, as if Silas had already vanished, and approached Maya. His proximity was a shock after the icy confrontation. "The car is waiting," he said, his voice dropping, "for her ears only." It was not a kindness following the defense, it was a demonstration. See what I do for what is mine. See the challenges I quell. He was showing her the cost of her sanctuary, and ensuring she understood the debt was mounting. As Maya slid into the back of the silent black car, watching the rain trace rivulets down the window, she felt no triumph, only a deeper, more claustrophobic dread. Luca's intervention had not neutralized Silas, it had cornered him. A cornered predator was infinitely more dangerous. And David, the external threat, was now armed with a new and terrible understanding. The walls of her gilded cage were proving to be excellent conductors, transmitting threats from both outside and in, resonating with a silent, escalating frequency that promised a storm was gathering, and her fragile shelter was at the very eye of it. The two shadows, one fueled by possessive rage, the other by embittered ambition, were beginning to converge, with her as the disputed territory upon which their war would be waged. The invitation was not presented as such. It was a directive, delivered by Anya with the same tone she might use to announce a change in the linen delivery schedule. Mr. Vitali requires your presence this evening. Be ready at 8. Wear this. She handed Maya a garment bag containing a dress of midnight blue silk, simple in cut but whispering of extravagant cost. It was armor of a different kind. The message was clear: tonight, she was not a member of the staff. She was an accessory, a prop in a play whose script she would not be given. At 8 precisely, Luca's car collected her. He was already inside, a silhouette against the passing city lights, his profile carved from obsidian. He offered no explanation, no conversation. The car glided through the streets, moving away from the bustling downtown core toward an older, more stately district where the buildings spoke of old money and discreet power. Their destination was Le Jardin de Cristal, a restaurant whose name Maya had seen only in society magazine spreads. A uniformed valet opened the car door, his eyes carefully blank. Inside was a world of hushed opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations above tables swathed in cream linen. The air held the subtle symphony of fine dining, the delicate chime of silver on porcelain, the murmur of low, confident conversation, the earthy perfume of truffles and reduced wine sauces. Luca guided her through the room with a hand resting lightly, possessively, on the small of her back. Every head, it seemed, turned subtly in their direction. The recognition was not of celebrity, but of significance. Power acknowledged power. They were led to a secluded table in a glass-enclosed conservatory overlooking a private, illuminated garden. A bottle of champagne arrived unbidden, its cork removed with a sigh that seemed part of the room's atmosphere. Luca finally spoke, his voice low. Observe. Listen. Do not speak unless directly addressed. The dinner was a performance. A man joined them, introduced as Mr. Arnaud, a supplier of rare European wines. He was jovial, flushed with the success of the contract he clearly believed was being celebrated. His laughter was a touch too loud, his gestures a fraction too broad for the refined space. Luca was the perfect host, engaged, asking pointed questions about yields and regional difficulties. Maya sipped her champagne, the bubbles like tiny needles on her tongue, and watched. She watched Luca's eyes, which remained cool and analytical even as his smile was practiced and polite. She saw the exact moment the mood shifted. It was over the dessert course. Arnaud, emboldened by the champagne and Luca's apparent goodwill, leaned forward conspiratorially. The 45 Bordeaux shipment we discussed, there was, unfortunately, a minor issue with the documentation at the port. A clerical error, of course. The tariffs were recalculated. It has increased the unit cost. A small thing, but I'm sure a man of your understanding. His voice trailed off. Luca had set down his fork. The gentle clink of silver on china was the only sound at the table. The pleasant facade didn't fall away, it simply solidified into something else, something lethally calm. A clerical error, Luca repeated, his voice devoid of all previous warmth. How unfortunate. And these recalculated tariffs, the difference would be absorbed by my margin, I assume. Arnaud's smile faltered. Well, in these trying times, partnerships must share burdens. We are not partners, Arnaud, Luca interrupted, the words soft as falling snow. You are a conduit. A valve. Your function is to open and close at my direction, not to constrict. He leaned forward slightly, and Maya saw the man across the table blanch, the jovial flush draining to a sickly gray. You have taken delivery of my payment. The shipment is, by our agreement, mine. You are now suggesting you wish to renegotiate the terms of my property's release, based on an error that benefits only you. Luca, please, it's just business, Arnaud stammered. It is, Luca agreed. And the business of disrespect is one I am unwilling to fund. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod toward the entrance of the conservatory. Two men she recognized from the onyx room, Victor and another, appeared as if from the shadows. They did not approach the table. They simply stood, silent and immovable, their presence an absolute period to the conversation. Arnaud's eyes darted to them, then back to Luca, wide with a primal understanding. The fine food and expensive wine had suddenly turned to ash in his mouth. I will see that the original terms are honored. Immediately. The shipment will be delivered tomorrow. Tonight, Luca corrected gently. Tonight, Arnaud whispered, nodding frantically. Good. Victor will accompany you to ensure there are no further, clerical issues. Another subtle gesture, and the two men stepped forward, their posture making it clear Arnaud was to rise. The defeated supplier stood on trembling legs, cast one last, terrified glance at Luca's impassive face, and was ushered away, his exit as silent as his entrance had been conspicuous. The violins from the main dining room seemed to swell, a ironic soundtrack to the ruin that had just transpired over crème brûlée. Luca turned his attention back to his dessert, taking a small, deliberate bite. He did not look at Maya. He didn't need to. The lesson had been administered, cold and brutal. This was the true currency of his world, not money, but consequence. This was the engine behind the velvet rope at the onyx room, the reason for the fearful respect. It was a violence that needed no fists, only the unflinching will to enact total ruin. The car ride back was a cavern of silence. The city lights streaked past, blurred and meaningless. Maya sat rigid in her corner, the silk of her dress feeling like a shroud. The controlled, surgical brutality she had witnessed was more terrifying than any of David's explosive rages. This was violence institutionalized, made efficient. She was shaking, not from fear of Luca in that moment, but from the sheer, vertiginous drop into the abyss of what he truly was. When the car pulled into the underground garage of her building, Luca finally spoke. His voice was flat, stripped of all pretension. Get out. The dismissal was a slap. The pent-up terror and confusion boiled over, transmuted into a sharp, reckless anger. She didn't move. Was that my purpose tonight? Her voice was thin but clear in the enclosed space. To be a witness? A little lesson in how the great Luca Vitali handles his business? He turned his head slowly, his eyes gleaming in the dim garage light. You are part of that business now. It was necessary for you to understand its nature. Its nature is theft and terror, she shot back, the words tasting of the bitter champagne. A muscle feathered in his jaw. It is order. Arnaud believed the rules did not apply to him. I corrected that belief. The world outside is chaos, Maya. The world I build has structure. You, of all people, should appreciate the difference. I appreciate being used as a prop in a demonstration, she said, her hand fumbling for the door handle, desperate to escape the suffocating truth of him. His hand shot out, not to hurt her, but to cover hers, stopping her from opening the door. His touch was electric, ice-cold, and burning at once. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. The clinical detachment was gone, burned away by a sudden, fierce intensity. You were not a prop. You were an affirmation. He saw you there, silent and beautiful, and he understood that a man who commands what I command does not tolerate petty betrayals. Your presence was the final proof of my reach. His gaze dropped to her lips. The anger between them crackled, metamorphosing into something else entirely, a dark, magnetic pull that owed its very existence to the fear and power that had just been displayed. It was the attraction of the precipice, of wanting to touch the very thing that could destroy you. He closed the distance. His kiss was not an offer of comfort, it was a claim. It was possessive, demanding, an assimilation of her defiance and her fear. It was the seal on the contract she had signed in that rain-soaked bar. For a heartbeat, she resisted, the shock of it freezing her. Then, a terrifying surge of something raw and reciprocal rose within her, a need to meet that devastating power with a surrender that felt, in its absolute totality, like its own kind of strength. She kissed him back. It was over as suddenly as it began. He pulled away, his breathing slightly altered, the only sign the encounter had affected him at all. He released her hand. Now you can go, he said, his voice rough at the edges. Maya stumbled out of the car, the taste of him, of danger and dark promise, lingering on her lips. She rode the elevator up to her silent, beautiful prison, her reflection in the polished doors a stranger's, a woman in a ruined silk dress, her mouth slightly swollen, her eyes holding not the terror of a victim, but the stunned, chaotic awakening of a willing accomplice. The unveiling was complete. She had seen the monster in the light, and in a moment of profound, self-annihilating clarity, she had not flinched away. She had kissed it. The kiss in the car became a ghost that haunted the sterile air of the penthouse and the hushed corridors of the Onyx room. It was a line crossed in shadow, its implications bleeding into the daylight of Maya's new reality. Luca did not reference it. There were no lingering touches, no meaningful glances. His demeanor reverted to its prior state of controlled, analytical distance. Yet, everything had changed. The silence between them was no longer merely the silence of captor and captive, it was now charged with the memory of a collision, a mutual acknowledgement of a dangerous, latent force. She had seen his ruthlessness unveiled, and he had tasted her defiant, answering fire. An unspoken transaction had occurred, elevating her from mere property to something more complex, a contested asset with a will of its own. This subtle shift did not go unnoticed. Silas, whose instincts were honed for weakness and opportunity, perceived it with the acuity of a shark scenting blood in the water. He saw the new, faintly defiant set of Maya's shoulders, the way her eyes sometimes met Luca's for a beat too long before flickering away. He saw, more damningly, the way Luca's gaze would sometimes follow her as she moved through the bar, a contemplative, possessive intensity that had not been there before. It was a distraction, a fissure in the granite facade of his boss's focus, and Silas mined it with relentless, grim satisfaction. The confrontation came on a night when the bar was empty save for a few late-night regulars. Maya was reshelving bottles in the backlit glass case, her movements methodical. Silas appeared beside her, his bulk blocking the light. He didn't speak to her at first, instead addressing Victor, who was tallying receipts at a nearby table. "You see it, don't you?" Silas's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, meant to carry. "The boss gets a new pet, starts forgetting what kennels are for. Starts forgetting that pets get fleas, and fleas carry disease." Victor kept his head down, a study in neutrality. Maya's hand stilled on a bottle of single malt. Silas turned his pale eyes on her directly. "He thinks he's taming you. Making you a little doll for his shelf. But you know what you are? You're a flashing beacon. Every cop your obsessed ex-boyfriend talks to, every favor he calls in, they all lead here now. Because of you. He's risking a century of careful work for a bit of sentiment." He spat the last word as if it were poison. Luca emerged from the staircase at that moment. He had heard. He stood at the edge of the room, a statue of tailored black. "Silas," he said, the name a command for silence. Silas did not turn. His anger, long simmering, had found a vent. "No, Luca. This needs saying. This ends now. You want her? Fine. Keep her in a bolt hole, visit when the mood strikes. But this," he gestured dismissively at the bar, at Maya, "this public installation is a liability. The detective is a gnat, but gnats swarm around rot. She is rot. Emotional rot. And it's spreading to your judgment." The word rot hung in the air, vile and final. Luca moved then, crossing the space with a silent, lethal grace that made even Silas tense. He stopped a foot from his underboss, the air between them crackling with the static of impending violence. "My judgment," Luca repeated, his voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet it sliced through the room, "built this. My judgment keeps the wolves from our door. My judgment is not yours to question." He took another step, forcing Silas to look down at him, a reversal of their physical dynamic that was purely psychological. "You speak of loyalty, Silas, while you foment dissent. You speak of security, while you challenge my authority in front of others. That is the true rot. And I do not tolerate infection." It was the closest to an outright threat Luca had ever issued to his second. The schism was no longer subsurface, it was a chasm yawning open at their feet. Victor had vanished, having melted into the back office. Maya stood frozen, the bottle cold in her hand, understanding that she was the mere catalyst for a much older, deeper conflict. Silas's face was a mask of seething resentment. The scar by his lip was livid. He held Luca's gaze for a long, terrible moment, then looked deliberately at Maya, his eyes promising a future reckoning. Without another word, he turned and strode out the back entrance, the door slamming shut with a finality that echoed like a gunshot. In the ringing silence that followed, Luca finally looked at Maya. There was no victory in his expression, only a cold calculation. The defense of her had not been romantic, it had been a necessary assertion of dominance in a pack that was showing signs of fracture. "Anya will see you home tonight," he stated, his voice once more devoid of all effect. "Do not wander." The warning was prophetic. 2 days later, dispatched on a rare, sanctioned errand to a specific artisanal grocer 3 blocks away, a test of controlled autonomy, Maya felt the old, familiar prickle on the back of her neck. She was accompanied by Leo, a young, quiet driver, but he waited double-parked outside the small shop. As she selected the required overpriced olives, she glanced through the window and saw him, reflected in a hanging copper pan. David. He was across the street, leaning against a lamppost, dressed in civilian clothes, but his posture was all cop. He wasn't hiding. He was watching her with a terrible, hungry patience, a smile playing on his lips. He raised a hand in a slow, mocking wave. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She dropped the jar, the glass shattering on the tile floor with a sound like a scream. Leo was inside in an instant, his hand closing around her arm. "We leave. Now." As he hurried her out, Maya looked back. David hadn't moved. He didn't follow. He just watched, his smile widening, as Leo bundled her into the idling car. It was a message, brilliantly clear, *, I see your cage. I see your guards. I am not afraid of them. I can get this close whenever I choose *. Back in the penthouse, she was trembling, the illusion of safety Luca had woven thoroughly shredded. When he arrived that evening, his expression was granite. She told him what happened, the words tumbling out. He listened, his eyes growing colder with each detail. "He's escalating," she finished, wrapping her arms around herself. "He wanted me to see him." "Of course he did," Luca replied, his tone chillingly calm. "He is demonstrating that my perimeter is not impermeable. It is a provocation." He walked to the window, looking out at the city as if he could see David standing on some distant street corner. He believes he is playing a game of cat and mouse. He does not understand that he is already in a cage of his own making. He has just chosen to rattle the bars. Luca's quiet fury was more terrifying than any outburst. It was a strategic, focused thing. He turned from the window, his decision made. He will be dealt with. Permanently. But on my terms, in my time. You will not leave this building again until I say so. The edict was absolute. The fracture with Silas, David's brazen stalking, they were convergent crises, both born from her presence. She was the spark, and the empire of Luca Vitali, a structure she had believed to be immutable, was showing its first, dangerous cracks under the heat. The loyalty that bound it together was fracturing, and in the gathering silence, she could hear the fault line spreading, a deep, subterranean groan that promised an earthquake was coming. And she, at the center of it all, was no longer just a victim or a prisoner, she had become the pivotal weight upon which the balance would tip. The days that followed David's brazen display settled into a new, more brittle rhythm. The penthouse, once a sterile sanctuary, became a true prison. The doors did not need to be locked, the invisible perimeter Luca had drawn now felt electrified. Anya delivered groceries with a face like stone. Leo, the driver, became a permanent, silent sentinel in the building's lobby, his presence a constant reminder of the threat that pulsed just beyond the glass. The fear that had receded in the wake of Luca's power now returned, redoubled, tinged with a new, sickening flavor, the realization that her sanctuary was also her bait. Luca's visits grew less clinical and more strategic. He would sit in her living room, not speaking for long stretches, simply observing her as she moved through the space, a scientist watching a specimen under duress. The charged tension from the kiss was still there, but it was now subsumed beneath a larger, more urgent calculus. He was no longer just programming her for his world, he was preparing her for a specific role in a play only he could see in its entirety. "He operates on emotion," Luca said one evening, swirling a measure of amber whiskey in a crystal glass he'd brought with him. He never drank from her things. Obsession is a predictable engine. It requires constant fuel. The sight of you, the idea of you just out of reach, it is the highest octane. To end this, we must let the engine run until it seizes. A cold knot formed in Maya's stomach. What does that mean? He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights like polished onyx. It means he will come for you. And when he does, he will be alone, desperate, and blind to everything but the prize. A predator in a tunnel vision charge is easiest to dispatch. She understood then, with a clarity that stole her breath. She was to be the lure. The thought was a violation so profound it dwarfed David's physical abuses. That had been the rage of a selfish man, this was the cold utility of a strategist. You're using me as chum in the water. I am using the situation to its logical conclusion, he corrected, his voice devoid of any humanity. He is a toxin in your blood. The only way to remove it is to draw it out. Cleanly. Finally. The plan was laid out with chilling simplicity. A staged vulnerability. A carefully leaked piece of intel through a compromised source David had already been cultivating, a low-level hustler on Luca's payroll who played both sides for crumbs. The information, a rare, unescorted medical appointment for Maya at a discreet clinic on the edge of the city, a window of opportunity born of a supposed scheduling error. It was a flaw in the armor, just believable enough for a desperate man to clutch at. The morning of the appointment arrived, heavy with a leaden sky. Maya dressed in the clothes Anya provided, a simple, forgettable coat over a plain dress. Her hands were ice. Luca stood by her door as she was about to leave with Leo. He didn't touch her. He simply said, "Remember. You are safe. You are always being watched." It was not a comfort. It was a statement of control. He owned the very danger she was walking into. The clinic was real, a nondescript brick building in a quiet neighborhood. Leo parked at the curb. "I will be right here," he said, his eyes scanning the street. The performance began. Maya walked inside, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She checked in at the desk, gave a false name, and took a seat in the empty waiting room. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. She watched the door, expecting David to crash through it at any second. But nothing happened. After 20 minutes, a nurse called her name. She was led to a small examination room and told the doctor was delayed. She should wait. The room had a secondary door, marked "Supply." It was part of the design. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then, a sound from the hallway, a muffled thud, the scrape of a shoe. Not the orderly sound of a clinic. Her blood turned to sludge. The main door handle turned slowly. David slipped inside. He looked older, gaunt, his eyes burning with a feverish, triumphant light. He held a detective's shield in one hand and a small, snub-nosed revolver in the other. "Hello, Maya," he whispered, the words dripping with possessive glee. "Time to go home." In that moment, the betrayal was complete. Luca had known. He had known the exact second David would breach the room. This was the trap snapping shut, and she was standing at its center. Before she could scream, before she could move, the supply door burst open. Victor and another man she didn't know filled the space, their own weapons drawn and silenced. David whirled, his expression cycling from triumph to shock to raw terror in a microsecond. There was no dramatic standoff. No words. Two soft, wet foot sounds, like books being dropped on a carpet. David jerked, his eyes wide with an astonishment that had no time to become pain before it extinguished. He crumpled to the linoleum floor, a marionette with its strings cut, his blood a dark, sudden flower blooming against the sterile white. Maya stared, a silent scream locked in her throat. The reality of it, the finality, the sheer, casual efficiency, was more horrifying than any nightmare. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was garbage disposal. Victor didn't look at her. He and his partner swiftly, professionally, bundled David's body into a large, black canvas bag. They wiped down surfaces with practiced speed. Within 90 seconds, it was as if David Crowley had never existed in the room. Only the faint, coppery scent in the air remained. Leo appeared at the main door, his face impassive. "This way, miss." Numb, mechanically, she followed him out a back exit, through an alley, and into a different car. The ride back to the penthouse was a blur. She sat in the back, smelling not the car's leather, but the ghost of gunpowder and blood. She had been the honeyed twig. Luca had been the stone that crushed the insect that came to feed. He was waiting for her in the living room when she returned, standing at his usual post by the window. He turned as she entered, her face ashen, her body trembling not with fear, but with a seismic, soul-deep shock. "It's done," he stated. "He will never touch you again." The words, meant to be a liberation, were the final twist of the knife. A raw, guttural sound tore from her throat. You used me. You lied. You said I was safe, and you put me in the room with him while your men waited to eliminate the threat, he finished, his voice cool. You were never in danger. My men were there before you arrived. Every second was controlled. That's not the point, she shouted, the tears finally coming, hot and furious. You made me part of it. You made me look him in the eye so your execution would have a better backdrop. For the first time, a flicker of something, not regret, but a sharp impatience, crossed his face. Sentiment is a luxury for the safe, Maya. You were not safe with him alive. Now you are. The method is irrelevant. The outcome is all that matters in this world. Your world, she spat, wrapping her arms around herself as if to keep from flying apart. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for you to make me an accomplice to murder. He closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, his hand snapping out to grip her chin, forcing her to look at him. His touch was not gentle. You asked for salvation. I gave it to you. This, he said, his gaze boring into hers, the ghost of David's blood almost visible in his dark eyes, this asterisk is the price of salvation in the real world. It is not delivered by angels. It is carved out by men like me, in blood and silence. You are free of him because I am what I am. Never forget that. He released her, and she stumbled back. The truth of his statement was a weight that threatened to crush her. David was gone, erased. The freedom she had run for. The silence that settled over the penthouse in the days following David's execution was of a new and profound quality. It was not the tense quiet of anticipation, nor the sterile hush of luxury. It was the dense, heavy silence of a tomb for the man whose life had been erased, and for the last fragile ghost of the woman Maya had been before she stepped into the onyx room. She moved through the rooms like a somnambulist, the taste of ash perpetually in her mouth. The world outside the windows continued its frenetic dance, but it had receded, become a silent film playing on a screen she could no longer touch. The vibrant colors of the city lights now seemed garish, mocking. Her freedom was a palpable void, an emptiness where terror had once lived, and its vacancy was somehow more terrifying. Luca did not come. No directives arrived via Anya. No summons to the office. It was as if, with the threat eliminated, she had served her primary function and was now to be stored, a trophy on a shelf, her purpose fulfilled. This abandonment, this sudden irrelevance after being the pivotal piece in his lethal game, was a desolation deeper than any anger. She was adrift in the gilded cage, with nothing left to run from, and no path forward she could conceive. When he finally appeared, a week later, it was unannounced. The soft chime of the penthouse elevator was a shock in the stillness. He entered as he always did, a sovereign entering his domain, but his usual aura of implacable control seemed attenuated. There were faint smudges of fatigue beneath his eyes, a slight tightness at the corners of his mouth that spoke of pressures she could not see. He carried a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, a gesture that felt profoundly alien. He poured without asking, handed her a glass. She took it, the crystal cold against her fingers, and said nothing. She simply waited, her eyes hollow. He did not sit. He stood before the vast window, his back to her, his silhouette a cutout against the glittering skyline. You think me a monster, he began, his voice low, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. A machine that calculates life and death on a balance sheet. Efficient. Soulless. Maya remained silent, the wine untouched. Denial seemed pointless. Efficiency is a necessity, he continued, still facing the city. Souls are a liability. This is the first lesson of my inheritance. He took a slow sip of his wine. My father, Alessio Vitali, was not an efficient man. He was a creature of passion. Of grand gestures and terrible, sweeping loyalties. He believed in the romance of the family, in bonds sealed in blood and honor. A faint, derisive sound escaped him. He trusted a man who had grown up with him, a brother in everything but blood. Enzo. He turned then, and his eyes held not the cold fire of the present, but the distant, glacial sheen of memory. Enzo managed our southern interests. He was volatile, ambitious, but my father saw only the boy he had shared crusts of bread with. I saw a man whose eyes lingered too long on the ledgers, on my father's chair. I was 19. I warned my father. He called me cold. He said I lacked the heart that held a family together. Luca's gaze drifted past her, into the painful past. There was a meeting. A consolidation of territories. My father went, with Enzo at his right hand. He did not return. The official story was a rival family's ambush. The truth was delivered to me in a cardboard box, left on the steps of this very building. Inside was my father's signet ring, and a single, blood-caked ear. Enzo's message was clear: sentiment had killed my father, and it would kill the rest of us if we clung to it. The clinical way he recounted the horror was more affecting than any display of emotion. My mother died of grief within the year. Not a bullet, but a slower, more thorough poison. I was left with a fracturing empire and a choice: die romantically, holding the shattered pieces of my father's dream, or become something else entirely. I hunted Enzo. It took 2 years. When I found him, I did not give him a warrior's death. I dismantled his organization, brick by brick, turning his own lieutenants against him for pennies. I cornered him in a warehouse much like the one he'd used for my father. I did not kill him quickly. I explained to him, in great detail, the cost of his sentiment for power, for my father's throne. I made him understand that his passion was his weakness, just as my father's had been. Then I ended him. He finally looked directly at her, the memory receding, replaced by the intense, chilling focus of the present. You asked for a world without David Crowley. I gave it to you. The method was not cruelty, Maya. It was pedagogy. It was the only language that endures in the world I must inhabit. The world you now inhabit. Sentiment, mercy, hesitation, these are the variables that get people killed. What I did at the clinic was not an atrocity. It was a surgical removal. Clean. Final. It is the same principle by which I have kept myself, and by extension you, alive. He set his glass down and approached her. He did not touch her, but his proximity was a force field. You look at me and see a jailer. A monster. I am telling you that the monster was forged in the betrayal of a good man. The jail you live in is the only structure strong enough to keep the wolves of chaos from the door. David was one such wolf. There will be others. Silas, he let the name hang, a recognition of the ongoing threat. Your safety is not the absence of danger. It is my continued will to dominate the dangerous. You belong to that will now. His confession was not an apology. It was a dark seduction. It was an invitation to see the world through his lens, a Darwinian landscape where every softness was a fatal flaw, and the only morality was survival. He was offering her the keys to understanding her cage, not to unlock it, but to appreciate the necessity of its bars. You are free of him, Luca repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated in the space between them. But you are not free of me. You will never be. Not because I hold you prisoner, but because the world that birthed a David Crowley is still out there. I am the only answer to it. And you, he reached out then, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek, the touch startling in its intimacy after the blood-soaked story. You belong to the answer. To me. The words should have felt like a final, crushing sentence. Instead, in the wreckage of her old self, amidst the trauma of the trap and the chilling logic of his confession, they landed with a terrible, resonant clarity. He was not her hero. He was something older, darker, a primordial force of order, however brutal. Her protector was her forever jailer, and in a world that had shown her only predation, the solidity of his walls, the terrifying certainty of his law, began to feel less like a captivity and more like a perverse, long-awaited homecoming. The fight drained from her, not into defeat, but into a profound, unsettling acceptance. She was his. The debt was eternal. And in the stark economy of survival he preached, it was the only bargain that guaranteed she would wake up tomorrow. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she did not look away in fear or defiance. She simply looked, acknowledging the devil, and in that acknowledgement, sealing her pact. The acceptance that followed Luca's dark confession was not peace, it was the eerie calm of a surrendered battlefield. It allowed Maya to function, to move through her days in the penthouse and her nights at the Onyx Room with a mechanical precision that mimicked life. She polished glass, she arranged garnishes, she met Luca's occasional gaze with a blank, unreadable steadiness that seemed to satisfy him. She had become a well-maintained instrument in his collection, her will seemingly subsumed into his. Yet, beneath the placid surface, a solitary ember of the woman she had been before any of this, a woman who made choices, however flawed, continued to smolder. It was not a desire for escape, for the world beyond Luca's walls now seemed a formless, terrifying void. It was a need for agency, for a single, definitive act that belonged to her alone, an act unorchestrated by his cold, omnipotent design. That need found its focus, perversely, in David. His ghost was a silent partner in her gilded existence. Luca had disposed of the body, but he could not erase the psychological footprint. The memory of David's final, shocked eyes, the reality of his absolute end, had been decided for her. She had been a passive prop in his erasure. To claim any scrap of herself back, she needed to confront that erasure on her own terms. She needed answers he had taken to the grave, about the life he'd systematically dismantled, about the friends he'd alienated, the lies he'd told to trap her. It was a morbid, desperate curiosity, a need to close a ledger she had never been allowed to see. She learned of the location through a moment of dangerous inattention. Silas, in a muttered complaint to Victor about clean-up duties, had referenced the riverfront lockup and the Crowley problem in the same scornful breath. It was a sliver, a careless clue. The riverfront was an old, decaying industrial district. A lockup implied containment. The pieces formed a horrifying, irresistible picture. David wasn't just gone, he was stored. The plan formed with a clarity that felt like madness. Luca was to be away for an entire night on business across the city. Anya, while observant, was not omnipresent. Leo's loyalty was to Luca, but his vigilance was predicated on external threats, not internal subterfuge. Using a bobby pin and a desperate, focused patience born of years avoiding detection, she managed to disable the alarm sensor on a service door in the building's sub-basement, a door used for linen deliveries, its system less sophisticated than the residential suites. She stole out into the night, a shadow in borrowed dark clothing, her heart a wild, frantic thing in her chest. She hailed a cab several blocks away, giving a vague address near the riverfront. The district was a skeleton of its former self, warehouses standing like rotted teeth against a sky stained orange by distant city lights. She found the specific unit from Silas's description, a roll-up door sealed with a heavy padlock, a smaller, rusted man-door set into the side. The lock here was old, simple. A piece of rebar from a pile of discarded rubble served as a crude lever. The door groaned open on protesting hinges, exhaling a breath of cold, damp air that smelled of mildew, motor oil, and something sweetly foul beneath. Inside, in the gloom pierced by a single, dangling work light, she found him. Or rather, what remained of him. David was secured to a metal chair, his form limp, head lolled to one side. He was pale, waxy, but unmistakably preserved in the chill. He had not been buried or burned, he had been filed away, a piece of unfinished business or a potential bargaining chip. The reality was more grotesque than any fantasy of disposal. This was Luca's ultimate control, even over death itself. A wave of nausea threatened to buckle her knees. But the ember of her defiance blazed. She stepped closer, her shoes whispering on the concrete grit. "Who did you talk to?" she whispered to the corpse, her voice sounding alien in the hollow space. "What lies did you tell about me? Was any of it ever real?" The questions were pointless, pathetic. But asking them was hers. This visitation, this trespass into Luca's most secretive domain, was her first autonomous act since the rain-soaked night she'd fled into his world. She did not hear the second door open, the one connecting this unit to the next. The first sign was the shift in the light, a new shadow falling across David's still form. She turned. Silas stood there, leaning against the doorjamb, his arms crossed. There was no surprise on his face, only a deep, vindicated satisfaction. In his pale eyes, she saw not anger, but opportunity. He had not followed her, he had been here, tending to some dark chore, and she had walked into his web. "Well, well," he rumbled, his voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. "The little bird flies the cage." And straight into the cat's mouth. He pushed off the frame and took a slow step inside, his gaze flicking from her to David's corpse and back. Sentimental visit? Or just morbid curiosity? Doesn't matter. Luca's perfect, obedient pet has a will of her own after all. And she's just broken the one rule that matters. Maya backed up, her spine hitting the cold metal of a workbench. I needed to see. You needed, Silas mocked, taking another step. You needed. That's the disease. Your needs, his feelings for you, it's a cancer. And tonight, you've just given me the scalpel to cut it out. He stopped, a cruel smile touching his scarred lip. He'll never believe you acted alone. He'll think you were meeting someone. That you're a leak. A traitor. Or, perhaps something worse happens here tonight. A tragic accident. A grieving Luca, his judgment finally cleared of your distracting influence. The threat was explicit. He could kill her now and stage it, using her unauthorized presence as the perfect cover. Or he could use her trespass to finally turn Luca against her irrevocably. He'll know it was you, Maya breathed, terror finally breaking through her defiant haze. Will he? Silas chuckled, a dry, sinister sound. I'm not the one who disarmed security and crossed the city to visit a corpse. You are. That's a fact. Facts are powerful things. Now, be a good girl and stay put. I have a call to make. The boys will be so interested to know the detective's body has attracted vermin. He backed out, pulling the man door shut. She heard the distinct, final scrape of the external padlock being snapped closed. She was locked in the tomb with the man she had gotten killed. Panic, pure and blinding, seized her. She was trapped, not just in a room, but in Silas's plot. Her rebellion, her grasp for agency, had not just failed, it had handed his greatest rival the weapon to destroy her and fracture Luca's empire in one stroke. She had been so desperate to own a piece of her past that she had jeopardized her entire, terrifying present. The consequences of her choice echoed in the silence, louder than any scream, a chilling testament to the brutal truth of Luca's world. Every step taken without his sanction was a step into an abyss. And she had just leapt. Time lost all meaning in the frigid, corpse-lit dark. The single bulb buzzed like a dying insect, casting long, wavering shadows that made David's slumped form seem to breathe in the periphery of her vision. Maya did not scream. She did not rattle the door. She sat on the gritty concrete, knees drawn to her chest, her back against the cold metal bench, and descended into a state of pure, crystalline awareness. The panic had burned itself out, leaving behind a calcified calm. This was the end result of her assertion of will. This concrete box was the final, logical destination of any path not carved by Luca Vitali. The irony was absolute. Her quest for answers from a dead man had delivered her into a tomb where she would likely join him. Silas's triumphant sneer played on a loop behind her eyes. He had not needed to kill her himself, her own actions had provided the rope, and he would simply guide Luca's hands to the noose. She did not know if it was hours or only minutes later when the outside world erupted. It began not with sound, but with vibration, a deep, metallic shudder that traveled through the floor, followed by the distant, muffled pop-pop-pop that was utterly alien to the warehouse district's usual silence. Gunfire. Suppressed, but unmistakable. Then a louder crash, the shriek of tearing metal. The warehouse door, the large roll-up one, groaned as if in agony before being violently wrenched upward, flooding the space with sudden, shocking light from outside floods. Silhouetted against the glare was chaos given form. Men moved with brutal efficiency. She saw Victor, his face a mask of focused violence, firing a pistol two-handed as he advanced alongside others she recognized from the bar. They were met by Silas's loyalists, the disgruntled, the ambitious, those who saw in the old wolf's bid for power their own chance to rise. The warehouse was not a sterile clinic, it was a close-quarters battleground, echoing with shouts, grunts, the sickening thud of impacts, and those stark, percussive cracks. And at the center of the storm, a singular, dark blade cutting through the chaos, was Luca. He wore no armor, just his immaculate suit, now a moving piece of the shadows. He moved with a terrifying, economical grace, not the brawling style of his men, but something far more lethal. She saw him disarm a charging man with a twist of the wrist, firing a single shot into his knee before moving on, already seeking the next target. His eyes were not filled with rage, but with a cold, apocalyptic focus. He was pruning a disease from his organization, branch by branch. He was looking for her. His gaze swept the cluttered space, over the pallets and machinery, past David's grotesque chair, and locked onto her huddled form in the corner. In that split second, something inhuman in his expression fractured. It was not relief, but a raw, blazing intensity, a possessiveness so profound it transcended even the violence around him. In that glance, she understood the true depth of his earlier confession. She was not just a belonging, she was the one belonging he would not allow his world to take from him. "Luca! Behind you!" The warning was torn from her throat without thought. Silas emerged from behind a stack of crates, not with a gun, but with a long, heavy wrench raised high, his face twisted with a lifetime of bitter resentment. Luca turned, but the arc was already descending. He moved, but not enough. The wrench caught him a glancing blow on the shoulder, a sickening crunch of cloth and bone. Luca grunted, staggering, but his other hand shot out, seizing Silas's wrist. The two men stood locked in a brutal tableau, the familial betrayal made physical. Silas was bigger, fueled by hatred. Luca was wounded, but he was precision incarnate. He didn't try to overpower, he redirected, using Silas's own momentum to slam him against the metal support of a shelving unit. Before Silas could recover, Luca's free hand, holding his pistol, came up and pressed against Silas's torso. There were no final words. No dramatic pronouncement. Just two soft, close-range shots. Silas's body jerked, his pale eyes widening in a final shock that mirrored David's, before all light left them. Luca let him slide to the floor, a heap of spent ambition. The firefight was sputtering out, Silas's coup collapsing without its figurehead. Luca turned back to Maya, cradling his injured arm. He walked toward her, stepping over the detritus of the failed rebellion without a glance. The sounds of the battle faded, leaving only the ringing in her ears and the coppery scent of blood and gunpowder, thick enough to taste. He stopped before her, looking down. His breath came in controlled, sharp bursts. He saw the corpse of David Crowley, then her terrified, upturned face. He understood everything, her rebellion, her stupidity, the catalyst she had unwittingly become. "You came here," he stated, his voice rough with pain and adrenaline. "I needed to know," she whispered, the truth pathetic now. "And now you do." His gaze was inexorable. "This is the cost of a world without me. Chaos. Betrayal. Death in the dark." He extended his good hand, not to strike her, but in a demand. "Get up." She placed her hand in his. He pulled her to her feet, his grip like iron. He didn't lead her away immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket with his injured arm, a wince of pain crossing his features. He pulled out a necklace she had never seen before, a heavy, masculine chain of white gold, from which hung a pendant, a stylized, predatory bird with wings folded, carved from a single piece of black onyx. The Vitali crest. Without ceremony, he placed it over her head. The metal was cold, the pendant a heavy, definitive weight against her sternum. It was not a gift. It was a brand. A collar. A coronation. "You are mine," he said, the words final as a verdict. "You are the weakness I allowed, and the strength I will forge from this fire." This, he gestured with a bloodied hand at the warehouse, at the two dead men who had sought to own her in their different ways, is the altar of that covenant. Remember it. He led her out, past his victorious, bloodied men, who looked at her not with contempt now, but with a new, wary recognition. The necklace declared her status. She was no longer the stray, the liability, the spark. She was claimed, publicly and irrevocably, by the victor. She was part of the family now, her loyalty sealed in the blood of his would-be usurper. In the back of the speeding car, holding a compress to Luca's shoulder as he gritted his teeth against the pain, Maya looked at their reflection in the darkened window. Two pale faces, streaked with sweat and grime, bound by violence and a debt that could now never be repaid. The gilded cage was gone, shattered in the warehouse. It had been replaced by something else entirely, a kingdom of shadows, its throne spattered with blood, its crown heavy on her neck. She had sought freedom and found only a choice of masters. She had chosen, in the moment she took his hand and felt the weight of the onyx settle, the master who could enforce his claim against all challengers. The woman who had run from a detective was dead. The woman reflected in the glass was something new, born in the dark, claimed in blood, and forever bound to the devil who had remade her in his own stark, unforgiving image. Her protector, her jailer, her king. The story of Maya and Luca's dark empire is just beginning. New alliances will form in the vacuum of Silas's betrayal, and old enemies will see the Vitali family as wounded and vulnerable. The weight of the onyx pendant is more than symbolic, it marks Maya as both prize and target in a world where power is the only true currency. To discover what lies in the shadows of this gilded kingdom, the new threats, the twisted loyalties, the deepening of a bond forged in violence, **** subscribe to the tale ***, the next chapter awaits.